The Steel Colossus, Past, Present, and the Uncertain Future of the Tank. The ongoing war in Ukraine raises a series of questions about the future of armed forces. To what extent will rapidly evolving technologies replace humans on the battlefield? Which classic tactical principles will remain relevant? What will happen to the mass-produced heavy weapons, each costing millions of dollars or euros, yet capable of being destroyed in seconds by something resembling a cheap toy? Is there a place for tanks on the future battlefield, or do they already belong in museums? The last question is particularly pressing, and in the next few minutes I will share my perspective on the matter. To understand my thesis, we must first revisit the birth and evolution of the Steel Colossus. The birth of the trench breaker. No weapon appears out of thin air. Its arrival is always an attempt to solve a painful problem for which there was previously no answer. The tank is no exception. Although the earliest documented concept of a tank dates back to 1487, designed by Leonardo da Vinci, the first functioning prototype was developed by the British in 1915. It was an attempt to find a way out of the deadly deadlock of trench warfare and the colossal human losses it caused. It gradually succeeded. From its debut in 1916, despite being slow, clumsy, and thinly armored, the tank became a nightmare for the German infantry. It proved to be one of the most vital weapons in turning the First World War from a static conflict back into a dynamic one. By the end of the war, the British and French had produced several thousand units. The French introduced the revolutionary innovation, the Renault FT-17, the first tank with a fully rotating turret. The Germans produced only 20, but it was they who, in the peaceful years that followed, would draw the most important conclusions on how to use tanks in a future war. Heavy heading versus high speed. From a purely tactical standpoint, two distinct concepts emerged between the world wars. The first advocated for the infantry tank, a vehicle meant to overcome obstacles in its path and destroy targets directly threatening its own infantry. These tanks possessed thick armor that few weapons of the era could penetrate, along with large caliber guns to suppress enemy positions. The second popular concept was the cruiser tank. Here, the logic was reversed. It was mobile and fast, but lightly armored and less heavily armed. If we look for historical parallels, the cruiser tank acted like the classic cavalry, while the heavy infantry tank fulfilled the role of a battering ram or a siege engine. The German secret and the Blitzkrieg era. We must also mention the German contribution. During the 1920s and the early 1930s, Germany was under the strict restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, which prohibited it from possessing heavy armor. This forced the Reichswehr, predecessor of the Wehrmacht, to improvise, conducting secret training at a hidden base in Kazan within the USSR, as well as disguising experimental machines as agricultural equipment. The German military industry began working openly only in 1935. Beyond tanks, they produced vital equipment like radio sets. These, combined with superior organization, would become the key to success in the upcoming Blitzkrieg campaigns. Between 1939 and 1942, only the Germans provided radio communication for every single armored vehicle, allowing constant contact at all levels. Furthermore, Wehrmacht tanks utilized 5-man crews, allowing the commander of the tank to focus entirely on leading the battle, freeing him from the roles of gunner or loader. The Combined Arms Orchestra. Early in the war, no one understood better than the Germans that the tank cannot fight alone. Its effectiveness is greatest when it is part of an orchestra of different arms and services. To perform at its best, a tank requires artillery support to suppress enemy resistance, infantry to capture and hold territory, and engineers nearby to clear obstacles and mines. Air support was also frequently called upon for both bombing strikes and urgent photographic reconnaissance. Lastly, the German army excelled in organizing the repair and evacuation of damaged tanks. The Allies ultimately emerged victorious partly because they were quick to learn from their mistakes. They adopted the 5-man crew for the American Sherman and the Soviet T-3485 by 1943. Where the Allies truly surpassed the Germans was in production capacity. The US and USSR viewed the tank as a rapidly replaceable consumable, whereas for the Germans, each tank was almost a unique work of art. Ultimately, Germany's defeat was sealed by a desperate fuel shortage starting in the summer of 1944, which crippled both battlefield movement and crew training. The system of anti-tank defense. Movies often give the impression that the main weapon against a tank is another tank. While this happens, it isn't ideal. Tanks are expensive assets that shouldn't be lost lightly. Anti-tank defense is a system, a philosophy that includes passive means, ditches and mines, and active means, bazookas, artillery, aircraft, and other tanks. The goal of anti-tank warfare is to separate the enemy infantry from their tanks and destroy the armored unit's supply lines. The Cold War, East versus West. The end of World War II saw the anti-Hitler coalition split into two ideological camps. In the Warsaw Pact, Soviet doctrine relied on massive mechanized armies intended to overwhelm the West on the flat plains of Germany. Soviet tanks, like the T-64, were designed to be low-profile, fast, and easy to mass-produce for conscript crews. The most significant innovation was the autoloader, which reduced the crew to 3 men and allowed for a much smaller, harder-to-hit tank. In contrast, NATO relied on quality over quantity. They kept the 4-man crew, preferring a human loader, and focused on superior crew training and asymmetrical strategies. Knowing they were outnumbered on the ground, Western nations relied on their air superiority to strike the enemy's rear and disrupt supply lines. The lessons of Ukraine. The war in Ukraine, now entering its 4th year, has become the ultimate test for the tank. What have we learned? First, the absolute necessity of combined arms synchronization. If one link in the chain, be it reconnaissance, supply, or infantry, fails, the tanks fail too. Second, the death of the massed tank charge doctrine. Well-organized defenses can easily annihilate long columns of armor. Third, the flaw of the Soviet autoloader. Older T-series tanks have become rolling coffins because the ammunition is stored directly beneath the crew. A direct hit often leads to an instant fatal detonation. Fourth, the victory of Western philosophy. Ukrainian crews have come to respect NATO tanks, not just for their technical specs, but because they offer a much higher chance of survival. In Western armies, the human is the priority. The machine is the consumable asset. Fifth, the drone revolution. The mass use of drones has ended the era of the tank as modern cavalry. Tanks have returned to their origins, providing precision fire support for infantry. Today, tanks rarely move in large groups. They are covered in cage armor and are almost always accompanied by their own observation drones. Is there a future? Does the tank have a future? Certainly, but it must adapt. To regain its role as a decisive offensive weapon, the drone threat must be eliminated through a new kind of air superiority. Whether that solution lies in advanced electronic warfare, or perhaps the evolution into crewless drone tanks, the steel Colossus is not ready for the museum just yet.